Welcome to the Seeing Red podcast with Andi Turner and Garrett Fulce, checking up on Texas policies and politics with some federal issues thrown in, like the assault weapons ban, interest rate hikes, you get it, but it's mostly Texas, since we can't ignore the big stuff either. And now, here are your hosts, Andi Turner and Garrett Fulce.
Hey guys, welcome back for this week's edition of Seeing Red with Garrett Fulce and myself, Andi Turner. We're glad to have you and welcome back. You can go to facebook.com/the Seeing Red Pod. You can find us on Twitter at the Seeing Red Pod. You can go to YouTube and listen to us on the YouTube, youtube.com/Seeing Red Pod. If you want to email us, please do. Hosts at HOSTS at seeingredpodcast.com. And if you have friends who are like, podcasts? How do I get a podcast? Just send them to seeingredpodcast.com and it's right there. Like all the episodes are right there. So we have a lot to talk about this week. So I think, Garrett, we're in fourth special session now?
We are in the fourth special session, or as the official parlance is, the fourth called session.
Okay.
So we are in what's called 88(4).
Okay, yes. If you go looking on the website, yes.
Uh-huh. And that's how, like, if any legislation that's passed, we'll be like, oh, it's this bill from the 88(4) instead of 88R, 1, 2, or 3.
But for us regular people, it's the fourth special session. So,
yes.
So, all right. So where are we on school choice and border issues?
Well, they've both cleared committee, or they've all cleared committee, and they're on their way to the floor. The Texas border wall and like enhanced security. It's another $1.5 billion in that neighborhood for border security measures is going to be heard this week. It probably will pass. We'll see. It probably will pass the Senate. Or the Senate version. That stuff seems it'll get hammered out. Same with enhanced punishments for illegals. That's criminalizing the presence of illegal immigrants in Texas, making it a state crime, not just a federal crime. That bill is trying to set itself up to challenge a Supreme Court precedent from about 10 years ago called, I believe it's called Brewer v. Arizona, where Arizona had passed legislation. I think it was the first show me your papers, quote unquote, legislation, and that was struck down. Basically, the Supreme Court then had ruled that all of the immigration kind of policy was under the federal purview and that states couldn't add on to it. But there's some wiggle room with how that precedent was done, and then also, there's been 10 years of other precedent-setting legislation and litigation, so we need to see how that's going to play out.
Now, here's where I would ask this question, though, Garrett, and that is, if it is about people coming into this country, does that make it domestic policy? I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is a question for the courts, I think.
Well, and that's where there is a possible wiggle room. Right, because that one was all about trying to the Brewer v. the U.S. was about Arizona trying to deport folks themselves. In this case, I do believe that the law would be a state level crime if you were in the state of Texas without legal status, you'd be in violation of a crime. Or the statute, you'd be committing a crime but in being in violation of the statute, and then you'd be able to be imprisoned, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to be deported. But this is one of those things where they're trying to test the limits of Brewer and of what's happening with the federal border crisis.
I am extremely interested to see where this goes.
It's being set up as a challenge for that. So it'll immediately be imposed by the courts and then sit in the courts for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
3 years, unless it just gets struck down. So it's going to be it's going to be a battle, another legal battle. So we'll see how that goes. We also have HB1, which is the school choice ESA's bill. It's also an omnibus, so there's a lot of stuff in there about school finance and changing up the the minimum salaries for teachers and raising the minimum pay for teachers across the board. It also has changes in the basic allotment, though it's pretty dense, and I wasn't exactly sure what the changes are. The basic allotment being how much each how much money you get for each student. It also incorporates whole new sections about education savings accounts where money follows the kid, and instead of it being a set amount, it's pegged at 75%, I believe, of the basic allotment. So let's say the basic allotment per student is $12,000, which I think it's pretty close to that. You would end up getting a kid would end up getting about $9,000 in an education savings account, and they've rolled it all into one omnibus bill, which means there's one piece of legislation. So that's dangerous in Texas because we have what's called the one subject matter rule, which means a bill can only each bill has to be on the same topic. You can't roll in a bunch of stuff together typically unless they're really closely related. And what happens when you try to do it, if it's not done really, really well, or if you're able to sneak an amendment on there or change some language enough, then the opposition can kill the bill with a parliamentary inquiry or a point of order. So there's bill language. It's passed out of committee, but they're still hammering out some of the ESA and allotment language. So there's going to be a lot of amendments, and that's scheduled to be done and ready to come to the floor to have those arguments starting on Friday. So it's going to be a lot of interesting. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff on ESAs and teacher pay raises and basic allotment changes. Basically, we're trying to get it all done through one piece of legislation.
Well, and I read somewhere this morning that the Democrats are calling the voucher part of this a scam. And I was like, pick your words. Be educated. Pick your words. A scam is where somebody's getting something over on you and you are unaware. This has all been very public. The debate has been very public. And you may not like the bill, and I respect your right to disagree with me and not like the bill. But no, you don't get to call it a scam. That's wholly misleading, and it's just rhetoric. It's just, it sounds good in the newspapers. And I have no patience for that. You want to discuss the bill, discuss the bill. And if you think the bill is a bad bill, say so. But when you call it a scam, I mean, a scam is that Nigerian prince email that everybody got at one point in their lives. You know, I'm a Nigerian prince, and if you send me $5,000, I'm going to send you $5 million. That's a scam. That is not what this is. Garrett, what's the first rule of debate, right? Name calling is an automatic loss.
Well, I think the real first rule of debate is you're not actually trying to convince the other person that they're wrong. You're trying to convince the other people listening that you're right. But sure. I think that there's an interesting coalition on this bill, and I do think that in that you have a good chunk of Democrats, but not all, it's not really this isn't a party line vote. The people are trying to make it seem like it's one. You have a bunch of Democrats voting for ESAs, or a handful of Democrats voting for school choice, and you have a handful of Republicans, primarily rural Republicans, voting against it. Reading this bill in its current form, it's dense. There's a lot of stuff they're changing. And it's going to make a lot of education attorneys really invaluable for a few years, because there's going to be a lot of changes that they're going to have to help public, private, and charter schools navigate through. So that is, at least it's a economic surplus or economic stimulus in that regard. But it's hard to talk about the bill, and when you talk about these people calling it a scam, that's because it's changed 20 times, and they're just, yeah, you're right, it's just rhetoric. But we don't really know what its final form is going to look like, so it's hard to call it anything until you know whether it's going to. But it's going to be an issue people run on in some districts, and some people run against in others. Like, it's politics. Some people are going to be, some districts are going to love it, some districts are going to hate it. It looks like we're probably going to get a version of it, or the governor's going to keep pushing it until they actually vote and he gets something, and then it's going to go to the primaries, and then we're going to keep going at it because the governor wants it. So.
The good news is, we've been talking about school choice for months now, right? We've been talking about it. Texas has been talking about it. This is the fourth special session. We've had many, many conversations. And, way back a while ago, we had a guest on the program who was like, well, if they put this through in the first session, and I was like, and if they don't, that's okay. More discussion is good. I think having all this discussion is an excellent thing, and it's going to make for a better bill. Like, oh wait, and I've forgotten now what the issue was, but in the last special session, there was a big, oh, hey guys, you needed to take care of this thing. And now, as I understand it, they've taken care of that. So the bill is getting better and better and better. And there is no such thing. Folks, let me just say to you, as a longtime legislative director, there is no such thing as the perfect bill. And as a former teacher, if there are any teachers listening, it's like your lesson plan. You can have a great lesson plan. It can go swimmingly well. But the first thing we all do is go, all right, well, how can I do that just a little bit better? Legislation is the same thing. It can always be just a little bit better. So you're never going to have a perfect bill. But gosh, I really feel like they're trying to get as close to perfect as they can. And given that this is the fourth special session and these conversations continue to evolve, I think we're headed in the right direction.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that fourth special session. Talk a little bit about kind of the form of Texas government, because a lot of people listening are fairly new to Texas and that they didn't go to public school here. You didn't go to public school here. I did not. You went to school in, I'm not sure, you went to school in Maryland? Did you grow up there?
I went to Catholic school.
Okay. But even Catholic school in Maryland doesn't cover Texas constitutional history, so so let me kind of go over a little bit of this for you. Texas has a part-time legislature. They meet for, I think it's 140 days or 145 days every 2 years. It goes from about January to May, an odd number of years. The governor can call special sessions or called sessions for 30 days at a time, as many as he'd like. And historically, most years have had at least one special session. I think it's something like 65% of sessions end up having a called special. And then a lot of years have had 2 or 3. A handful have reached this 4 mark, and then the most all time was 6, and that was back in 89 and 90.
Wow.
So we're about halfway, a little more than halfway to the record. So we still have a couple more to go if we want to see history happen more history happen in the Texas House this year. But that leads to the question: is we do have a part-time legislature. Our legislators only pull a salary of $7,200 a year. That's $7,200, 7200 a year. That is their salary for being a legislator. And they get a per diem of about $230 for when they're in session to cover. A lot of people don't live near Austin. They have to have hotels and food and whatnot. But that's standard. There's not like a prorated amount, and they get that every day of the regular session. They also get it for every day in a called session. And this year we had a special kind of non-called session, which the impeachment hearing, which I do believe they got per diem for as well. So you kind of had like this extra session in there too, where the legislators this year have pulled in, I believe at the end of this session, will have pulled in around $57,000 to $60,000 total, which once again, not a lot of money. But what's interesting is that they lose most of their staff after the regular session. They typically have one or two staffers that they maintain throughout the year, and they'll have their chief of staff and their district director, or their chief of staff and then like whatever else. It's basically those two roles that'll be filled, and so they have far less staff during a regular session, so it's harder to, do some of the things. Plus, it's harder to run a legislator's office because a legislator's job and duty isn't just to pass laws. They have a lot of responsibilities via their constituent services as well.
Yes, tell me all about it.
Yeah. That part-time legislature derives itself from Reconstruction. It comes from a very, very big distrust of all government that happened after the Civil War and after Reconstruction, where they passed the Constitution of 1876 that made a ton of statewide elected offices where the governor didn't appoint a bunch of people. That's why we elect our agricultural commissioner. That's why we created the Railroad Commission, which used to regulate railroads and now regulates oil and gas. We have a land commissioner. We elect our attorney general, and we elect directly the lieutenant governor. You have all this kind of distrust. But one of the other things that they kind of have distrust with when they were creating that is the legislature itself. So they didn't want people being able to go to Austin and just ramming through legislation all the time without the people having any say in it. So not only did they make it a part-time legislature, not only did they make it a part-time legislature that only meets once every 2 years, they also made it where we have to pass a constitutional amendment for a lot of different stuff. Like, we just had a constitutional amendment election where there were 14 amendments on the ballot. There are only 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and we just had 14 to the Texas Constitution on one ballot. That's kind of the realm of difference. I mean, there's hundreds. I don't remember the exact number, but there are hundreds of amendments to the Texas Constitution. The Texas Constitution is one of the most unwieldy documents to read because there's amendments on amendments on amendments on amendments. And that's just something that is the document that we live with. But because of how you have to have an amendment passed in the state, you have to have 2/3 of both legislative bodies approve it. It has to be voted by signed by the governor, and then it goes to the people to have a majority vote. But that 2/3 number is important. It means you have to have 21 state senators, and you have to have 100 state representatives. And some of the stuff that was on there on this past election, for example, one of them was a ban on inheritance taxes. A couple years ago, we had a constitutional ban on income tax in the state of Texas. Now it's unconstitutional for Texas to have an income tax. We also passed a constitutional amendment that the $100,000 homestead exemption. So that was all done with 100 votes at least 100 votes in the House and 21 votes in the Senate. It required Democrat votes on those issues. We got those votes, and we get that type of reform when we get tax cuts because there are Democrat chairs in the House and, Andy, I'm sure you know this, Democrat chairs in the Senate. We have Democrat chairs all over, and we always have, because it takes trading for certain titles or whatnot in order to actually get all the stuff we want done.
So let me stop you right there. So you're exactly 100% right. But for those who are not involved in elections and really don't, they just kind of read the headlines and don't really understand the details, let me explain something to you. When you go to campaign manager school or campaign candidate school, the very first thing they tell you, and I know this because I've been there, is, okay, you filed for office, and it doesn't matter. Like if you're, maybe you're running for House of Representatives, or maybe you're running for Speaker of the House or President of the Senate. 1/3 of the people are going to be for you. automatically. 1/3 of the people are going to be against you, and it's that middle third that you've got to reach out to. It doesn't matter. You could be, and somebody's going to smack me for this, but you could be God himself, and somebody is going to be against you. That's just the way it works, okay? So in order to, in the case of, and I'll just use this as an example because it's so current, in the case of the Speaker of the House, there is, a great deal of criticism because, oh my God, there are chairmen who are Democrats. Yeah, well, that's fine. You can whine about that all you want. But when the speaker is smart enough to stack that committee with 5 of 7, let's say there's 7 members and 5 of them are Republicans, does it matter what the chair, what party the chair belongs to? No, it really doesn't. Because the committee is well stacked to represent the Republicans in Texas. And there are more of us than there are of them. So I don't have a problem with, that kind of thing. Because
there's also the tremendous benefit that having, in some cases, where the Democrat chair helps with the PR in that and here's the case in point. Right now, HISD, Houston Independent School District, is in a conservatorship managed by the Texas Education Agency because it continued to have campuses that failed basic assessments over years. And that legislation was carried and passed by Representative Dutton, who represents one of the schools in Houston that continued to fail. Wheatley, I believe, is the school. Wheatley High School. And he got that through because he was chair of the education committee. So it wasn't legislation authored by Republicans. It was a legislation authored by a Democrat to take over a school district that was mostly run by Democrats. If Republicans from Grayson County and Fort Bend County and Williamson had gotten together and passed legislation that did that, there would be far more outcry than there already is, and it would be focused on the Republicans. Instead, they have to focus on the fact that HISD was a failing district and these had schools that continued to fail, and now they have to deal with the issue itself instead of blaming Republicans for it. Well, that's good. That's a good. It gives some cover, basically, for good policy if you're going to, sometimes you have to let folks police themselves. And if they're willing to do it, you let them do it. In this case, Democrats policing Democrats.
But even his committee is still a majority of Republicans. So they got on board with
the chair
this.
There is power in the chair in that the chair can decide what comes up for a vote and how that calendar is set and all those sorts of things. The chair does still have a lot of power. But if the chair abuses that power, they'll be removed in the next session. And I mean, there are checks on that. There are workarounds for all of it. Plus, you can always bring stuff. You can always do certain things to get stuff around. They just want to blame. You have folks like Rinaldi who would rather keep people in the dark on how the system works, play on people's ignorance of how legislation is passed, to then put the blame on the person who he has a personal slight against or a professional motivation to go against. And instead of using that professional motivation to go after Democrats, he's using it to focus on Republicans as the chair of the Republican Party. And
he's a former House member, right? He's a former House member.
Yeah. Most famous for his time in the House for calling Immigration and Customs Enforcement on a group of folks protesting something about immigration. He decided just to call ICE on a bunch of protesters, then went up to a representative to tell him that he did that, and the person nearly decked him on the floor.
Yeah. I can understand that. I mean, you don't even know that these people are here illegally, but you're going to call ICE anyway. and then I read this article. As long as we're on the chairman of the state party, let's move there because I have thoughts. Thoughts. So I read this article, and it turns out that most of the money that the Republican Party has raised in the last year, well, since Rinaldi has taken over, most of the money that they have raised has come from Defend Texas Liberty. You know, that group that has anti-Semitic, at least one connection with anti-Semitic racist individual. And, other people are giving their money back. And the problem is that the RPT gives that money back. The only thing that Matt Rinaldi has done, and this was from one donor, raised $15,000. Other than that, and the man's job, he has two things he has to do. Every state party chair has two things they have to do. Two, that's it. Raise money and gain more seats. Or at least, keep the seats we've got. But no, Mr. Rinaldi, for some unknown reason, isn't going to give the money back, which I think is a terrible look for us. But also, he's not, like, I haven't gotten a fundraising mailer, and I get all the Republican stuff. I haven't gotten a fundraising mailer in forever. He's not asking for money. He's sitting back on his laurels going, here, DTL, write me another check, write me another check. And it's like, I don't want anything to do with DTL. I don't want anything to do with them. Until you disavow, which I haven't heard, Matt Rinaldi, Chairman Rinaldi come out and do. And now he's, engaged in this, fight over, I hate the speaker, so I'm going after his seat. And I didn't like the impeachment, so I'm going after this seat. And it's like, why are you going after seats that are nice, safe seats? Go after the purple seats and try to gain us some seats. That's your job. That's your job.
Yeah, he should be spending his time finding great candidates in districts, in swing districts. He should be spending time buffering districts like 112 in Dallas. That is a district that the Republican perennially loses in the governor and presidential races, but which Angie Chin Button has held for 12 years or more now at this point, right? This is a district that she is holding on by the skin of her teeth, and instead of fomenting more and more discontent within the party on these other districts, he should be raising money to make sure that we can spend as much as we can to keep Republicans in a seat like that. So we have some representation in Dallas County for Republicans.
All he's doing is confusing the voters, that not the political nerds like you and I, but some of the sidewalk voters who, well, and I talked to somebody a couple weeks ago who is pretty well informed and was like, well, all I'm hearing is, Dan Patrick's unhappy and Dade Phelan's a jerk. And this is a guy from the Beaumont area. And I'm like, okay, you need to go listen to the show because he's a friend of mine. So I was like, you need to go. We've had all this discussion and we've weighed both sides and you should go listen to the show. But bottom line here is, and then I had to go through and explain it to him. And this is an informed guy. I mean, he's not as well informed as we are because, he does other things for a living. But the bottom line is, you're confusing the voters, and that's going to put a crack in there where, it could end up being a purple district because you aren't paying attention to what you're supposed to be doing, Mr. Chairman.
Right. And like right now we've had several retirements announced in the past week. We had Representative Granger from the Fort Worth area. We had Representative Burgess from just north of her. And then Senator Springer has announced his retirement or his retirement.
And that's such a loss for Texas. I mean, I think the world of Senator Springer and you want to talk. I have not had the privilege to be overly involved with his office, but he is always the calm voice of reason in my experience. And And I think that's what we need. I think that's exactly what we need. And I am just so sad to see him go.
Texans is definitely at a loss for having seeing him retire. So he's so that's a lot of moving. It's kind of, I'm calling it musical chairs right now. You have Representative Goldman. I think he's an HD 97. Who's saying he's going to run for CD 12, which is Granger's district. So you have a lot of reps who are going to be running. You'll have city council people running. You'll have business people running. I think I would expect most of these open congressional seats that are kind of safer congressional seats, you end up having 8 to 10 viable to quasi-viable candidates run, plus others who just decide they want to run. So they'll almost certainly all go to a runoff. So a longer election season for some.
These are absolutely races that Chairman Rinaldi, particularly at the congressional level, should be paying attention to. And he's not. He's busy fomenting discord in races he has no business in.
To his credit, thus far, there hasn't been a lot of time for him to find stuff yet. The real thing he should have been doing is Colin Allred announced so he's running for Senate, U.S. Senate. Colin Allred this is another Dallas area district. That is a district that Republicans probably aren't going to win. It's a district that Pete Sessions used to hold before redistricting. Allred beat him in 2018, and then it was redistricted a little bit safer for Dems in 2020, between 2020 and 2022. But it's a district that we could possibly swing back long term. So the party should be investing in that district and in districts along the border, because these are districts that we could possibly swing back. And I haven't heard of any viable candidates coming out of 32. Nothing. There's no mailers, no hype, nothing. We have just waiting for the next sacrificial lamb that we'll just ignore and let the Democrats keep the seat. Even though this is the time to really go for it because it's an open seat.
Clearly that district is a from a Republican point of view would be a moderate seat. So you're not going to get a hardcore conservative like Ted Cruz into that seat. So I can't believe that that the chairman couldn't find a moderate Republican to run and then put party resources, because we're going to lose that seat. We're going to lose that seat because Chairman Rinaldi, once again, like, you've seen nothing in the press about him making any efforts. And Garrett and I read we read all this stuff every day because we're nerds, and then we pass this stuff along to you. We're not seeing, like, what is the chairman doing other than, causing problems? Like, I'm sorry, you may not agree with me. But I will say it right here, right now. Chairman Rinaldi needs to resign, and he needs to resign now, well ahead of the primary, so we can get somebody in there that actually knows what they're doing.
Well,
and is willing to do it.
Right now, the SREC is walking as lockstep with Matt Rinaldi, and we are going. And so, what happens if a chairman resigns, as we saw, is how Rinaldi took over the chairmanship a couple years ago. When Alan West decided to run for governor from the chairman spot, is that the SREC votes. It's the SREC who votes on the next chairman. So right now, if Rinaldi resigned, we'd get someone worse somehow, or as bad. We wouldn't get anybody good. But there's going to have to be some sort of effort among party delegates, because the party delegates to the state convention are the ones who elect the chairman, and that is ultimately the only way to do it, to get him out. But there doesn't seem to be any real effort to get that done at this point. I'm not really holding my breath. So basically, it's going to have to happen. In the short term, is candidates are going to have to fend for themselves. They're going to have to pay for their own data and do their own drops and all this other stuff, and the party's just going to do nothing to actually get anything done. I mean, right now there's something that's the vice chair, Dr. Dana Myers, sent out, is that the election integrity unit of the party, whatever grant or funding they had for it, runs out in December. And she's asking people to donate money to the party and earmark it specifically for that. Because right now, all the training and stuff necessary to do an election integrity program within the party that's existed for 20 plus years is about to go bankrupt.
And once again, I lay this at the feet of the chairman. Where's his fundraising initiatives? He is not doing anything to fundraise. He's not, the first major thing I heard Rinaldi do was, come out and swear retribution based on the impeachment or lack thereof, I should say. And it's like, why are you fomenting hate within our party? We have enough problems.
Listen, the civil war in this party, it's been a long simmering Cold War in this party, because this party for the longest time was a big tent of folks that were anti-left. And you had different factions within it, and we kind of went along because we wanted to fight Democrats. We wanted to fight leftists. That coalition, that Reagan coalition, has broken down over the past decade, and there's many reasons for it, but it's starting to crumble. And right now we're having a fight for the soul of the Republican Party, of whether or not, like what type, whether it's going to be conservatism or populism that wins the day. And neither of those two factions within the party, as it stands currently, will be able to win against Democrats, even in Texas, if they alienate the other to the point where the other faction isn't welcome.
I am not a hardcore conservative. And that's, we always reference how you and I differ. I am not far, far right. And therefore, I am less than in this party. And Chairman Rinaldi has done nothing. And we need to grow the party. And so, and we need to not, this is what I said about Jared Patterson, some time ago, I think at the beginning when we started this. And he said, I'm a conservative, but I'm not mad about it. That was that was a phrase on his Twitter page. And I was like, I'm down. I have mad respect for hardcore conservatives' viewpoints. And I understand why they are, and I'm not choosing to argue with them about that. But you can't throw me out because I'm not in absolute lockstep with you. The Republican Party stands for many things, and some are more stringent than others. And you want to throw me out? Where are you going to throw me? You want me to go to the Democrats? You want me to be a blue dog? I don't think so. And not with this mouth. So, we need to be more welcoming to different points of smaller, more efficient government types. And that could be far right, that could be moderate. That's okay. We need to not be the party of hate.
Absolutely, we shouldn't be the party of hate. I do think there's this long-running, simmering Cold War it's heated up into an outright civil war, is something that we need to resolve quickly, and hopefully through this next primary, and then like hammer this thing out and kind of come back together, because long term it's just not going to go well for us. But we're in the primary season. Now is the time where we air these grievances and we speak to these issues, and I think that the rhetoric is heating up on both sides from everybody, including us, and I think that's probably a good thing. We need to have this fight out, and we need to have it open, and we need to have at it. So let's do a political brawl, and may the best team win, and I'm pretty sure it'll be us. But I think that when we talk about certain people in certain positions, like Rinaldi versus us, well, we're not party leadership. We are not charged or responsible for the unbiased adjudication of election contests, nor are we responsible for the fundraising apparatus of the party to fund the the election of Republicans up and down the ballot in the general election. That's not our responsibility. And when you take this as party leader, you take the positions that Rinaldi has, that he'll only support certain Republicans at certain times, and he won't give aid to Republicans in a general election. He'll only let the national party save his ass through pass-through contributions. Well, we run into the problem where the party is just another political action committee, and it's a biased one, instead of having a party that's focus is on electing Republicans and finding new Republicans to run against Democrats. And the difference between, in my view, between the two roles is if Rinaldi was a private citizen, I wouldn't care nearly as much. I don't like Luke Macias. I'm not saying he like Luke Macias or Tim Dunn. They are not party leaders. They don't have a responsibility to the party as a whole. They can push their own agendas. I disagree with most of what they're pushing when it comes to their tactics and how they're trying to go about achieving their change, but I don't have a problem with them trying to do that. I have a problem when you get elected as chairman of the party to represent all of us, with the duties, knowing full well that the duties are raising money and getting Republicans elected, whether it's from the border or in the suburbs or in the exurbs or in downtown Dallas or downtown Houston, wherever the case may be, and you're not doing the basic stuff of even getting money. You're not even doing the basic stuff of like doing a voter integrity or a ballot integrity initiative. Like, you're not doing any of the real work of your position. So I think that's a good stop to end for this week. I want to thank everybody for listening this week. Check us out on social media. All of our social handles are at the Seeing Red Pod. We're pretty active on Twitter and Facebook, looking to get active on more social platforms as we grow this podcast and this community. Shoot us an email at hosts at seeingredpodcast.com, where we'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk about what viewers have sent our way. And we're here every Wednesday, bright and early. That way you can listen to it on your commute. And, we're hoping as we come into the holiday season to make some adjustments where you might be able to see our pretty faces here soon, doing a video podcast. So we're looking forward to planning that out and getting that started in the new year. So give us a follow us on all the social medias, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andi Turner and Garrett Fulce. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.